Hello there and welcome back to another review. Today we're going to be having a look at The Dead and the Deadly, starring Sammo Hung and directed by Woo Ma. I know probably maybe not as widely known or as beloved as say films like obviously the big other one you compare it to is Encounters of the Spooky Kind, Spooky Encounters, whatever you want to call it. But Dead and the Deadly is, this is a horror kung fu vehicle that is well worth checking out. It's definitely got that whole Encounters of the Spooky Kind vibe and flavour going on with it. Like I say, it's probably not as widely seen as Spooky Encounters, but it's definitely, in many ways, I always look at it as sort of a semi-quasi sequel as such, because it very much sort of paves the way and sort of goes on from what was sort of Spooky Encounters sort of established. Maybe not as classic Spooky Encounters, but definitely thoroughly enjoyable, and some great direction by Woo Ma here is also in the film. Woo Ma, I've mentioned him quite a few times actually, in many Hong Kong movies, more so than anyone can count. This was made in 1982. This was a film I remember watching late one night on Channel 4 here in the UK, when they actually did used to put good stuff on TV, when they actually used to put kung fu movies on, things like that. I remember it must have been around a horror season or something like that, because I think they put on Chinese Ghost Story. I think they put on Mr. Vampire 2, I believe, was on at one point, and I think they might have put a whole horror sort of type themes. Like, used to do these sometimes on Channel 4 in the UK. They would have like moments where for 5-6 weeks, every Friday about midnight, they would put on a kung fu Hong Kong action like horror, like just any kind of kung fu Hong Kong movie. Really awesome movie. It's finally got it. I'm so pleased this film has finally got the release it deserves, and this is one of them releases from Eureka where it really does keep me hopeful, and it's very optimistic about what is to follow, and I really hope that Eureka keep on doing what they're doing. 88 films as well, but it's like Eureka really doing well on the releases, and I just really hope they keep releasing some of these films that have not seen the light of day, like given a proper Western release. Dead and the Deadly was so overdue, and I'm so pleased they actually got round to releasing it. There's still more Sammo Hung vehicles that I would love to see released, getting the special treatment involving ghosts or vampires. Gambling Ghost being another one, Spooky Encounters 2, etc. So there's a lot to be released, but I'm so pleased we have got Dead and the Deadly. And what is interesting about Sammo is that he very seldom sort of repeated himself. He very rarely repeated himself and retread old ground that he had done before. Such was the genius that he is. But with these horror kung fu comedies, it was always something that he was willing to almost venture back to. He obviously had an affinity or love for the genre. That this is why Sammo, if you watch these films, Sammo is involved with the horror quite a lot, especially like I say in the 80s. There's a real range of films. One could argue it was a genre that he had a sweet and a soft spot for, producing Mr. Vampire, Spooky, being the innovator that he was, and many regard Encounters of the Spooky Kind to be one of, if not the best movie that he's ever made, myself included. You've seen any of my other reviews, Prodigal Son. It was always going to have imitators and copycats, and Sammo was more than happy with this film, Dead and the Deadly, to let his friend Woo Ma direct, which could have been seen as a sort of, like I mentioned, sort of a semi-follow-up to Spooky Encounters. It's not necessarily the same character, but the whole tone and look and feel of it is basically Spooky Encounters. Woo Ma, the director, previously works as an assistant to Cherie. He is in the film too, along with Sammo, and has a very generous helping of nose putty here. So, very, as I say, his prosthetics on his nose are very quite generous. Playing Cheung, and it's also Sammo Cheung Lee who is our lead in many ways. It's Woo Ma that drives the plot. His character, Woo Ma's character in this, very much drives the plot throughout the movie, and it's great to see Sammo and Woo Ma acting and being in the film together, because they both do sort of share in many ways sort of the billing as such. Sammo's obviously the lead, but Woo Ma is in it quite throughout the movie. You will notice as well that the film is very light on the fight sequences. With the first one not appearing until about full 50 minutes into the film. And even then, it doesn't involve Sammo Hung. It involves Wu Ma, who's not really sort of a kung fu guy. So the film is very interesting in that respect. But with these kind of films, it's the comedy and the horror and the atmosphere that you do sort of take in. So say Sammo's not involved even with that first fight scene, but it doesn't make the film any less entertaining. There really is only one other fight scene in the movie. The main notion here is on slapstick, like as depicted on the cover. So, Sammo pretending to be like a mannequin. Yet there is some, there is some bit of crass, lowbrow humour in the movie, but it's done in such a way of Sammo that he always do things in the best of taste. He didn't always do things that were sort of looked over fondly from audiences. Some of what happens is sometimes a bit, one could argue sometimes might be a bit vulgar or something like that, but it's Sammo Hung. He never cared. He never, he'll do what he wants. And but again, like I mentioned, The Dead and the Deadly is no less of a film because of it. So the film opens with Sammo dressing up as like this ghost to try and frighten this couple who are like committing adultery, and her husband does actually come back as a ghost and kills them both at this point. There's nice camera work here, even in that opening scene, and I love the way it's shot with sort of the green hue that's going on, with the camera sort of rotating around the characters, and it really does, like I say, evoke that Encounters of the Spooky Kind, Spooky Encounters look and feel. Here we have Lam Ching-Ying, very much foreshadowing his Mr. Vampire role, but he's played slightly older in here. It's like sort of this Taoist priest, but it's sort of, you can see where sort of Lam Ching-Ying was sort of an obvious choice to appear in Mr. Vampire if you do watch Dead and the Deadly. So Sammo is known as Fat Boy Chew. He works at like a local funeral home, and specialties include like funeral paper artwork and things like that. We also have Cherie Cheung here, who is set to marry Sammo as sort of the love interest, and she was one of the top actresses in Hong Kong, especially during the 80s. You may remember her actually proving what a nerd I am. She was also Shirley in Winners and Sinners. So Sammo's best friend, played by Wu Ma, has died, right? This is the whole setup for the film. He's died. At least he thinks he has, played by Wu Ma, and the missus is pregnant, and Sammo is already suspicious because we have a flashback of the two at this brothel where we learn that Wu Ma's character was impotent. Like, he couldn't, have like relations necessarily that way. In this flashback, Sammo actually takes what can be known as aphrodisiac, which causes him to feel very uncomfortable, shall we say, during that flashback to the brothel. So Sammo gets made up as a doll as the film progresses, so we can find out basically what's really going on. If you look at the cover, Sammo gets made up as sort of this mannequin, so we can check out Wu Ma's body, find out what is going on here, because it's like, hang on, wait a minute, if she's pregnant, I know he was impotent. Sammo suspects foul play. This is the whole premise for the setup of what's going on here. Again, I'm more in the way of slapstick physical humour here. Even just like Sammo's face when he's as the mannequin is hysterical. Sammo Hung, do not underestimate him for facial expressions and just character expressions. He really does sell it, and that's where the film, again, not a lot of kung fu, not a lot of fight scenes, but still entertaining nonetheless, and a really great kind of, like, you can call it a kung fu vehicle, but it's more just a horror comedy, is what it is. So, just hysterical stuff here from Sammo. We, the audience, learn that basically the whole thing is all a scam, and that Wu Ma, he's not dead at all. We as an audience learn that. So he is very much still alive. I love when Sammo begins the inspection on Wu Ma. I say, bearing in mind he is not dead at all. He is, like I mentioned, still alive, and Sammo is very, shall we say, very thorough with some of his inspection work on Wu Ma's body. Like I say, when I say lowbrow or a bit crass humour, I'm not saying it's not funny, because it is funny. He reached down to his down belows, holding his legs apart, not giving his best friend much in the way of dignity, where he has died, but he's sort of holding his legs wide apart. Wu Ma's got nothing on his bottom half. You got Wu Ma's bum there, and Sammo's just inspecting everything. But you can't help but laugh at it, because it is one, because like, Sammo has no idea that he's really alive. Wu Ma's pretending to be dead because of this whole scam he's got going on, and it is really funny stuff. Even have the priest coming back to take advantage of Wu Ma, believing he is dead, and tries to get his gold tooth out at one point. Like I mentioned, comedy is very much above even the kung fu here. So like I said, because Wu-Ma's like, he thinks to himself, because the guy's trying to rip his tooth out, and Wu-Ma, you hear like him think in his head, he's like, right, this is really gonna hurt, you know. No, he says something like, "Oh, this is gonna end badly," or something like that. And you even at one point see like a tear roll down his eye because he's so relieved, or like the pain. And it's funny stuff. Do not underestimate this film for sheer comedy value. So Sammo's like, "I will come back and do an autopsy," right? And Wu-Ma's sort of, yeah, fuck that. Like, what? He's not doing an autopsy. Like, how am I going to get out of this? And you know, it's like, hell no. You know, so at this point, Wu-Ma pretends to be a ghost to warn Sammo off, like even choking on the smoke that they're using to sort of pretend he's sort of appeared like this apparition from sort of the nether realm or something like that. And like, because he's sort of standing over this wall. He's sort of standing over this wall trying to talk to Sammo. He's standing on these two guys' shoulders. He's nearly falling off. And again, just really funny stuff. So Sammo returns to the autopsy where he uses like the world's biggest blade you will ever see to begin the autopsy. Chong Fat is in this film as well. He turns up in the scene like, look, you don't need to do that. I can use needles. And Chong Fat's in on the scheme with Wu-Ma as well. And Chong Fat's like, look, you don't need to do that. I've got needles here. This will tell me if he's still alive or not. Well, like sort of, you know, what happened sort of to begin like the autopsy to see if there was any foul play. So Wu-Ma's supposed missus comes in and makes a story up where she was sort of raped and that Wu-Ma sort of cared for her and helped her, you know, get back on her feet kind of thing. We learn they basically are after his grave goods. And that basically Chong Fat and his, I think it's his sister or his wife, they learn it's actually worth nothing. Like the grave goods are not worth a lot of money. But basically Wu-Ma's inheritance is. So now the twist is they actually want Wu-Ma dead for real, right? They actually want him dead. They want him gone. So we have some ninjas approach to kill Wu-Ma, much like in the same vein as you think of like ninjas in The Prodigal Son or Duel to the Death. It's got that kind of look and feel to it. This is when we had the first fight scene in the movie, as I mentioned. This is about 50 minutes in. And like I say, which, you know, it does have some very interesting facts, this fight scene. It doesn't feature Sammo. It's Wu-Ma, and he was more a comedy and kung fu actor than a martial artist. And it's more than likely, you could even hazard a guess, it may have been Yuen Biao that was doing a lot of the doubling here for Wu-Ma. Don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic little fight scene. It really is a nice little fight scene that really does add a bit of variety and just to get a bit of martial arts and kung fu into the film. And it's really nice and tight and it pops. It's got that classic style. And it doesn't go on too long, but it is a fight scene that probably could have gone on. They probably could have got another minute or so out of it because it would have been nice if the action scene was a bit longer. But I don't think that's what Wu-Ma and Sammo were going here. Lots of flips and kicks here, but it's still a great fight nonetheless. So then Wu-Ma gets killed and actually becomes a ghost. Like, he actually does become a ghost at this point. And I love the scene where he starts talking to him in the market and everyone thinks Sammo's just going crazy because Sammo's just talking to mid-air, basically. Sammo's just... nobody knows who Sammo is talking to. And all the market traders are getting all freaked out. Like, let's just get out of here. Because this guy's like... he's an absolute lunatic. He's talking to nobody, which I thought was quite funny. I always felt Sammo loved working with others and above all respected them. And he was always happy to help them out and not always put himself front and centre. And this is what you get here. Sammo was more than happy for Wu-Ma to direct. Sammo was obviously interested and had a love for the genre with that horror comedy kung fu. And it was, like I say, Sammo didn't have to do it, but he was more than willing to do it. And like I say, he was... you know, a fantastic director in his own right, a fantastic action star in his own right. But here, you know, under Wu-Ma, obviously he'd worked with Wu-Ma so many times and even did after this movie. There was maybe a respect there amongst the two. Wu-Ma might have been like, I want to direct you in this. And someone's like, sure, yeah, no problem. So at first, Sammo's reluctant to help, you know, get vengeance, as can't believe he's like, Wu-Ma has to fess up about the scheme that he was going to do. Sammo can't believe it because he sort of lied to him and that kind of thing, and he doesn't want to help. And Wu-Ma wants to borrow Sammo's body so he can sort of get revenge. And there's actually some split screen here where you see sort of two Sammos, which actually for its time And for a Hong Kong movie made in like the year it was, doesn't look too bad. I don't think it looks that bad. I don't think it looks too awful. Sammo, being the great physical comedian he is, even goes far as to copy Wu Ma's, even like his facial expressions, down to the ground. I do love movies like this where it's like a kung fu horror, but the comedy in the actual story is very much sort of front and center here. So we finally get to see Sammo let loose a bit in a fight scene, and this is really the only fight scene that Sammo gets. There's only really, like I mentioned, 2 fight scenes in the whole movie, and even then they're not that long. They are literally, and one of them doesn't feature Sammo. So the film is very interesting in that regard. So Sammo does have a sort of little fight scene. The fights are very much short and to the point, and they serve their purpose, but no more, if you know what I mean. They don't drag them out. Wu Ma and Sammo would have the fight, move on. They don't make it go on any longer than it needs to. And whilst nothing groundbreaking, at the same time it pops, it snaps. The choreography is on point, do not get me wrong, as you would expect for somebody with Sammo Hung's involved. So he kills Cheung Fat, and I love when they are carrying Lam Ching-Ying in the street at one point. To everyone else, it just looks like he's floating as well down in the middle of the high street, and Lam Ching-Ying's being carried. Again, another good idea of the film is having a female as the main villain, which really wasn't all that common. She ends up like bleeding, and when Sammo and Wu Ma go in, they just sort of slap her out the way. A total complete disregard for her at one point. Like there's no sympathy whatsoever, and they start looking for Sammo's body. Now, the whole film plays like a Sammo Hung film, just doesn't, just not quite, that Sammo classic about it, if that makes sense. Just not quite that 5-star Sammo material we come to expect, but the film is still an amazing, brilliant kung fu horror comedy. So Sammo actually dies at this point, and Lam Ching-Ying advises Cherie Cheung on how to bring him back. Again, Sammo taking very much a back seat here in terms of screen time. So it's at this point we get the ghost guards, who are pretty much like Martians, and there is some great lighting as well at the end of the movie, I will add. Cherie Cheung told to pay them off with some wine and eggs. Chu, Sammo's character, comes back as a beetle, and what I love about the movie, you have a great cast, interesting plot that takes a few twists and turns along the way, great costumes, great practical effects, and great direction from Wu Ma. And like I say, maybe not as classic as 5-star sort of as, say, Encounters of the Spooky Kind, Spooky Encounters was and is. Dead and the Deadly is still, as I keep saying, is still an enjoyable, brilliant film. If you wanted more of that sort of Spooky Encounters type of movie, then look no further than Dead and the Deadly. To me, it is a classic. I don't care what anybody says. It is. I think Dead and the Deadly is a classic, and while, like I say, probably widely overlooked, but if you've never seen this movie, please go and check it out, because if you've seen, like I say, Spooky Encounters, you want more of that kind of thing. Dead and the Deadly, you're going to be right at home. But to me, it is a classic. Even get some nice graphics at the end, like, of course, like sort of look dated for the time and being a Hong Kong movie. They are still quite good in terms of sort of semi sort of special effects. In a way, it looks like the film had quite, I would argue the film looks like it had quite a high budget for what it is. The whole film works, whilst not heavy in the kung fu department. You are not short of comedy here and pure entertainment. So please definitely go and check out Dead and the Deadly, because as I say, it's a really overlooked Sammo Hung film, and one, if you love your Sammo, you love your horror, you will be right at home here. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I'll see you soon.
Don't concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all that heavenly glory.